Okay, so now that we have these particles, let's go ahead and figure out where we're going to put them in the room. So, by the way, on your keyboard, 6 is the key that brings up your particle view. So if you close the particle view, if you hit 6 on the keyboard, that'll bring it back up. So for right now, we don't really need these particles to do the next step, so we're just going to turn these off. So just turn both of these off, and then your particles will be turned off. Okay, now this slab right here, this original piece, we can't delete this because right now we can't delete it because the particles are being instances of this object. So don't delete this. Okay, now later on, once we convert our particles to actual pieces of geometry, then we can do that. But right now, let's just hide this. Okay, so we've got our floor here, and what we need to do is to be able to bring out the actual room. Okay, so I've got it hidden. And so here's the actual room that is being built. And so we need this so that we can see exactly where we want the particles to go out here. Okay, so let's go ahead and bring up the material editor, and let's just turn this checkerboard off now. We're not going to need the checkerboard anymore. That was just to kind of demonstrate the process. And so what we're going to do is we're going to come in here and we're going to create us a bitmap that we're going to actually use with this. Okay, so we're going to select the entire thing. And we're going to put us a shader on this. Okay. So we're going to create, this is, let's just leave that one. Let's create another, and we're just going to use the standard shader for right now. This will be fine because this is not going to be the final shader. And we're just going to call this one floor. Okay. And then let's hold down the shift key and make a copy of that, and we'll call this assets. Okay, so we're going to right click and assign this to everything in the scene. And then we're just going to pick the floor, and then we're going to assign this to the floor. Okay. Now what I want is the floor to be white, and I need it to be 100% self-illuminated so no lights will show up in the scene. And we want our assets to all be black. So we'll make those all black. So we'll have a black and white piece right now. Okay. Now I'm going to turn on my gate. Okay, that's Shift F to see your gate. And then we're going to go up here to our render setup. And I'm going to change this back to custom 640 by 480 because that's kind of the proportions this is. And then I'm just going to kind of zoom in, and I just kind of want to fill up this space, but I got to make sure I don't crop outside of that space. Okay. And so when I hit render now, okay, then what that's going to do is give me a white ground with black pieces for all the pieces that are in here, and then there's a black background in here, okay? I want this to be larger, so I'm going to go ahead and hit my lock button right here to lock these proportions in, and then let's go ahead and give us, maybe 2,000 pixels on our width, and let's render that, and then we're going to save that out. We're going to take it into Photoshop to create where we want our particles, our debris to be by painting a black and white map to control the particle system. Okay, so I'm going to pause this while it renders it. Okay, so once that's rendered, we're just going to save this, and we're going to save it in our render output folder. Okay, and because this is just going to be a garbage file right now, and matter of fact, let's don't put it there. Let's go ahead. We know eventually it's going to be a bitmap we're going to use in our scene, so we're going to put that in our scene assets images folder, and we'll just call this slabs slab control. Okay, and we can just save this as a JPEG. We don't normally want to say JPEGs, but this is a kind of garbage file. We're not going to really use this, so we'll just save that out. Okay, so now we want to come in here and open that in Photoshop. Okay, and then our scene assets, images, and there it is. We'll open this up. Okay, I want to make sure this is exactly white. It looks a little gray to me, so I'm just going to kind of come in here and make sure that's nice and white. Okay, so the way it works is the particles go where it's black. It goes where it's white, And so what we're going to do is we're going to double click on our background to make it a layer. We're going to make a new layer. We'll put that below and we'll fill that with white. We'll turn this one, opacity down so we can see it. And then we're going to paint back on top. And so I'm just going to get a paintbrush, and we're painting with black. And so we're just painting real loosely where we want the particles to be. So I'm going to say, well, there's going to be a bunch around here, maybe down the side of this here. Particles here, maybe quite a few, around these bookshelves down in here. Okay, now you can always come back and redo these, so you don't have to, this doesn't have to be all that good. Maybe some debris kind of floating out there. Okay, a few in here, something like this. Okay, and I'm leaving all these on layers so it's easy for me to later come back in here and alter these. Okay, and so we'll turn this back up. Now what I'm going to do on this is I kind of need to remove this out of this piece here. So I'm going to come in here and let's go ahead and crop this. We need to crop it to the edge of the room. So let's go ahead and crop this so that it's just a perfectly fits right on the room. And so I'm just going to go select by color range and pick the black and select that. Okay. And then I can go into this and I can delete that out so that the particles don't go underneath those pieces. Okay. All right, and so then I'm just going to select all that and copy it merged. I'm going to paste it back on top, and I'm going to invert that. Okay, and so where the white is where the particle's going to go, and then they won't go where the black is. Okay, so always going to save, when I'm doing work like this, always want to save this out as a Photoshop or a TIFF file. So that we can come back to it later and adjust it. So I'm just going to kick that out. And then to put on my object, I want to use it as a targa file. Okay, so we don't want layers in our files that we're using for texture maps. And so this is my slab control targa. 24-bit is fine. Could have been 16-bit. We do not want a 32-bit. Okay, so now we can come back in here. And we'll start off by just putting us a gray shader on everything. So, assign arch and design on everything. And then for our slab scatter, we'll put that back on the ground. Okay, then what we're going to do is to go into the diffuse, standard, bitmap, and then we'll load that bitmap in. Okay, scene assets, images, and the targa. Okay, then we want to see that in our viewport, so turn it on here, and then we should be able to see it in our viewport. Okay, and you can see that the mapping coordinate on this is backwards. Okay. You see there's the chair right there. So when this person made this room, they made it from a box, and so the normals are flipped upside down, so it's backwards. Now I can go in here, put a mapping coordinate on it, and flip it. Another thing I do is just come into my bitmap here and put a -1 on the U tiling, and that'll flip it. That's what I'm going to do. And so now wherever that's white, that's where our particles are going to go. Okay. So let's go ahead and hit 6 on our keyboard, and let's turn our particles back on. And now you'll see our particles are going where that slab, where that white is. And these particles, these slabs look big to me. Okay. So go back into my particle system on my shape right here, and this is the scale of them, so I'm going to make them down smaller, and that seems pretty good. If I want to, I could add more. So if I go back to my birth, I could say make more particles in there if I want more of them in there. And so there you go. Okay, so I'm being able to control that, and I can always go back into Photoshop and paint, repaint this, and it'll update. Okay, save it back over, and it'll update, and so I can control where the particles are going in there. Okay, then the next thing I want to do is to turn those particles into objects, okay, so that we don't have to use the particle system anymore. So we're going to go up here to geometry, compound objects. We're going to get a mesher. This is just a little icon that we're drawing out here. It doesn't matter how big it is or anything. Then we're going to go to modify, and then we need to actually, I'm going to hide the ground so I don't actually pick the ground. So as I click on this icon, I go pick object, and I need to pick one of the particles, okay, and then that'll create my particle system out there. Now, it'll automatically offset it, okay, so all I have to do now is come in here and turn my particles off, okay, oops. Sorry. Need to, once we create these, right click and go ahead and convert this to an editable poly, okay. So now I can turn my particle systems off, which turns those particles off. Then I'll just have this. Then I'm going to zero this out down here, which will put the particles back in the correct place. And so now those particles are back on the ground. Now, once I mesh these, I no longer need this, so I could delete this out. Now, I would probably save a separate file, so I have one file that's got the particle system in if I want to come back here and regenerate them, and then I save another file that's got this all separate, okay? And so now these are actually, it's one mesh, okay? Now I can replace the material that's on there now, okay? Because I don't need it anymore to control the particles because now they're meshed. These are individual pieces, so if you go in here, edit poly, if I don't like something, I can always take these in and actually move these around, okay? And that's pretty much how you do it, okay? So that's how to use a particle system to generate rubble, okay? And a quick way to generate the actual rubble that's in there. Now, according to how close we're going to get to these, you can see that some of these are interpenetrating, okay, because it's not a true physics system, okay, and so I might want to come in here and move some of these out or whatever, but for the most part, you're probably, these particles are going to be so small that we're not going to notice that, okay. And that's one way to do it. Now, there are other ways to do it, and I'll do some other videos on different ways to do it, but that's a quick way to be able to generate a bunch of rubble and get it thrown around your scene really quick. Okay, thank you very much.